Welcome to Standing Guard, what we have learned from the enhanced forward presence on NATO's frontier. This is a result of, this webinar presents the results of a research project that was recently published by the NATO Defense College through their research division, where it is available open access, so you can download it. You'll find it there as a volume entitled Lessons Learned from the Enhanced Forward Presence 2017 to 2020. Its fourth year now. We figured it's a good opportunity to take stock of the initial intent of the enhanced forward presence, what has been accomplished, and the way forward. The enhanced forward presence, of course, consists of 4 host nations: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and 4 framework nations that provide headquarters capacity and some of the combat capacity: the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, and the United States. All of them assisted by a host of other NATO member countries, because this is ultimately the objective of the enhanced forward presence as a deployment model. Rather than inside the NATO command and control structure, it is outside of that structure, and it brings NATO member countries together to assist other NATO member countries, in this case, in the face of Russian revisionism, to ensure the territorial integrity of NATO member countries, and of the area of responsibility of NATO more broadly. The project was made possible by a targeted engagement grant to the Mobilizing Insights in Defense and Security program by the Department of National Defense in Canada. My name is Christian Leuprecht. I'm a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. I'm also senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which is.
Good afternoon, and I think we lost Christian in his opening statement there, but I've known Christian for a number of years, and I'm have so much admiration for the work that they do in bringing public conversation to security topics. So I'm Lieutenant General Francis Allen. I'm the Canadian Senior Military Representative at NATO, and it's my great pleasure today to be hosting and moderating this event with our panelists, who are the authors of the various chapters of the research paper that Christian had identified. It is a paper that is structured along the concepts of host nations and framework nations. And so the way that we're going to have our conversation today is also structured along that same sort of an approach. We're going to have a first panel that talks with the authors who considered the experiences of the host nations. And then we'll have a second panel that discusses the experiences of the framework nations as seen by some of the authors of those chapters. Finally, at the very end, we'll get some summary comments from Alexander Moens, and then we'll be, of course, having some questions and answers with our experts as part of this conversation. So we'll start off with this particular structure, and so I'm going to start to introduce the first panel. We're very fortunate today to have 4 members representing the 4 host nations of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland, and then let each one give some quick summaries about the way that they have structured their input for the research paper, their key findings, and then we'll move into a collaborative Q&A session with all 4 of the panelists with us. So first, I'm going to be introducing you to Tomas Rostoks. Tomas is a senior researcher at the Center for Security and Strategic Studies at the Latvian National Defense Academy. He also holds the position of Associate Professor in International Relations at the Department of Political Science at the University of Latvia. He's written numerous articles and book chapters on deterrence and state intentions, Latvia's foreign and security policy, Latvian-Russian relations, human security, a host of security topics. You're actually such a pro, Tom. Very glad to have you with us here as the first panelist. Can you provide us that sort of opening summary thoughts about the chapter that you wrote?
Yeah, I was very glad to be part of this project indeed, because I had a strong research interest in the concept of deterrence and how it works in practice. So this was really a wonderful opportunity to look into how deterrence works in Latvia, how one particular aspect of deterrence works. And although the study itself has numerous findings, I will focus on three. The first outcome, I conducted interviews. I also did literature studies, and the first outcome is that that Latvia obviously is very happy to host NATO EFP battle group. It's the biggest battle group in terms of the number of nations which are part of the battle group. It's also the biggest battle group in terms of the total number of military personnel stationed in Ādaži, nearby Riga, and it gives Latvia a clear sign that its security concerns have been taken into consideration, and that the alliance has taken serious steps to address them. Also, as I mentioned, Latvia is hosting the biggest number of NATO member states as part of one single battle group. So kind of getting representatives from 10 NATO member states to work together has been quite a challenge. But although at the start of this process back in 2016, 2017, it might have been seen as a liability, but it has increasingly been regarded as a strength. And the battle group is certified to be battle ready twice a year, and this integration at the level of battalion has been regarded as very successful. And the third finding from my chapter is that taking into consideration that Latvia's military is relatively small, then 1,500 military personnel that form the battle group is actually quite a substantial force. So not only we've had integration within the battle group between 10 representatives of 10 NATO militaries, but also the battle group itself has been integrated into land forces mechanized brigade in Latvia. So the brigade supports the battle group and vice versa. So those are the three biggest takeaways, and also just to finish my introductory comments, Latvia has been very pleased to have Canada as the framework nation, because Canadian mission has been well staffed and well resourced. And that is exactly what we were looking for.
Great, thank you, Tom. That's a super great introduction. And next, if I could, I'd like to ask Martin Hurt, who wrote the chapter about Estonia. Martin is a researcher at the International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn, Estonia. And Martin, as today is Estonia's Independence Day, I would like to congratulate you and wish you a happy Independence Day for Estonia today. And thank you very much for spending part of that day with us as well. Martin's areas of research include development in NATO and the EU, and particularly national security and defense-related topics that are of the Nordic-Baltic regions. Among his many accomplishments, he's worked as the defense counselor to the permanent representative of the Republic of Estonia at NATO. So in another life, Martin, we might have run into each other in the hallways at NATO. Prior to that, he was with ICDS as a research fellow and the deputy director between 2010 and 2016, and as well has worked at the Estonian Ministry of Defense in various positions. So Martin, welcome, and please share with us your thoughts and experiences as you were investigating this.
Thank you, General. First, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this project and for organizing today's event. I wrote the contribution together with my very good colleague, Mr. Kalev Stoicescu, about the enhanced forward presence seen from the perspective of Estonia as a host nation. we concluded that the main benefit of the enhanced forward presence obviously involves the increased deterrence that improves our regional security and reduces the risk of armed conflict, and that's the most important thing. It signals to Russia that an attack against any of these four nations would immediately trigger a military reaction of the rest of the alliance, and this is the central piece of why EFP was established. Our study also concluded that the deployment has strengthened Estonia's bilateral cooperation with the United Kingdom, being the framework nation here in Estonia, but also with France and with Denmark. And it offers everyone involved valuable training opportunities. Training is still something that has more potential to be exploited in the future. As I said, the main benefit of the enhanced forward presence relates to deterrence. There were four underlying reasons for the 2016 decision to set up the enhanced forward presence. One was Russia's capability to, if necessary, cut off the Baltic states from the rest of the alliance. The second was Russia's military superiority with conventional forces in this region. The third was the state of Allies forces with low readiness that prevents or could prevent rapid reinforcement of the Baltic region. And fourth, last but not least, the Russia's long-range capabilities that they have developed while the alliance was busy in Afghanistan and out-of-area operations. All these underlying reasons for why the EFP was set up in 2016, they still exist. From that point of view, nothing has changed. And it's important, we believe, that NATO's strengthened deterrence posture agreed at Warsaw. It's important to keep in mind that it does not consist only of the enhanced forward presence, but it also has three other elements: conventional forces for rapid reinforcement, but also the missile defense capabilities and the nuclear capabilities of the alliance. Today, the EFP works reasonably well. What the alliance needs to work with more is capabilities to reinforce the Baltic states and Poland if necessary. And this is still a deficiency. NATO's deterrence posture agreed at Warsaw cannot be considered completed until allies have modernized their conventional forces and capabilities and increased readiness. So until then, rapid reinforcement remains the weak link affecting the success of the enhanced forward presence. With this, I would pass the floor back to General Allen. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. I appreciate that. Some very insightful comments into the broader issues that NATO is challenged with today. I'll bring in our third panelist now. It's my pleasure to bring in Margarita Seselgyte, who is an associate professor and director of the Institute of International Relations and the Political Science at Vilnius University in Lithuania. Her main research interests include security and defense studies, strategic cultures, small state studies, European Union security and defense policy, European Union Eastern Partnership policy, and regional security cooperation. She's also worked at the Baltic Defense College in Tartu, at the Lithuanian Military Academy, and has had several civil servant positions at government institutions in the Republic of Lithuania. So thank you. Welcome to join us here today. Margarita, please share with us your thoughts about the research that you provided.
Thank you, General. I'd like to thank the organizers, first of all, for this wonderful opportunity to contribute to the book and also to speak, to present my findings. I believe that my findings would not be so different from my colleagues' findings, because the essence of the enhanced forward presence is pretty much the similar. But it was interesting enough during our discussions and then during the research to see that the combination of host nation as a nation and framework nation and contributing nations, their cooperation brings something new to the concept of enhanced forward presence, both in terms of the concept, but also in terms of the procedures, implementation, and cooperation. So for me, from my side, that was very interesting discovery. And now I'd like to share a couple of ideas, couple of findings from my research from the Lithuania as a host nation perspective. So first of all, we were very happy to receive enhanced forward present battle group in Lithuania, and our former president, Dalia Grybauskaitė, said that this was the first such serious and long-term military commitment from NATO to Lithuania since we have joined NATO. So we also consider this step as certain NATO's commitment for Lithuania, and we are very happy to receive this NATO's commitment. But apart from this political messaging, also enhanced forward presence has the military purpose to ensure deterrence, to deter Russia, to limit, to mitigate the existing military imbalance, and also to reassure Lithuanian society that we would not be attacked from the Russian side. And since 2017, nothing bad had happened. And we can say that, you know, the main function to ensure deterrence for this region, to ensure deterrence for Lithuania, is being implemented. And it works. And, our National Security Department publishes annual threat assessment, and it recognized that the possibility that Russia would invade Baltic states, would invade Lithuania, has been diminished a lot. And this scenario, the worst scenario of fait accompli, if the NATO is cut off from the region, is being very, very little likely. So on one hand, the deterrence works, and on the other hand, we can see that our society supports both NATO very much. The numbers have been increasing throughout 5 years, and also the NATO's presence, and they believe that NATO could deter Russia from doing some harm in Lithuania, from attacking Lithuania. So 83% support NATO's presence, and 74% of the Lithuanian citizens believe that enhanced forward presence helps to deter Russia. So we manage also to ensure the reassurance moment. But also, apart from these main functions, there are other functions which EFP battle group in Lithuania is implementing, is ensuring very well. First of all, investment into the infrastructure, which comes both from the host nation, but also comes from the contributing nations, exercises, increasing interoperability, also increasing knowledge of the terrain, of Lithuanian geography, or of the conditions. That is also very important. But another very important aspect is political ties. And having Germany as a framework nation in Lithuania is important on one hand for the purposes of the enhanced forward present battle group for its functions, but on the other hand, we have been seeing that the relations, both on the political level and economic level, with Germany have been growing during the last years, and we are very happy about that. So there are a lot of things which enhanced forward presence brings for Lithuania, and we are happy to have it. But also we have certain challenges and things in terms of where we can try to achieve more progress. So one thing which is very important is continue investing into the infrastructure. Now things are working quite well, but at the beginning there were some challenges and delays. So this is very important to continue in that direction. Another very important thing is to look at the enhanced forward presence battle groups as a part of the whole NATO system, and ensure also that this concrete battle group, for instance, in Lithuania, has more enablers in terms of ensuring better effectiveness and action if there is a crisis, but also better interoperability with the other battle groups and also with the other elements of NATO's defense. Another very important thing, at least for Lithuania, is also to have United States boots on the ground, and this is also related to the function of deterrence, to reinforce this function of deterrence, and this could be also the way forward, how to ensure better effectiveness of enhanced forward presence. And also another very important issue is the political decision making. And on one hand, it is important to know that Germany has a very strong commitment to stay in Lithuania, but also it is important to know about the overall system, about the commitment of all other participating, contributing nations, that, you know, overall system works perfectly and ensures deterrence in the region. So it's not only Germany, but also other countries, and that could be a challenge, but also an opportunity to work to ensure that the enhanced forward presence is working very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margarita. That's excellent. Now I'm going to bring in our fourth panelist, who is Piotr Szymanski. He is a research fellow for the Regional Security Program at the Center for European Studies in Warsaw, Poland. He focuses mainly on security and defense policies at the Baltic and Nordic states, as well as military cooperation in the region. So Piotr, welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning. Please share with us your thoughts about your chapter that you wrote.
Thank you for this introduction. Just to correct you a little bit, it is Center for Eastern Studies, where I deal with this regional security. And after this short introduction, please let me introduce some of the results of my research, our research. So once again, many thanks for the invitation for the project and the chance to present my findings at this webinar. And I would like to start with a brief introduction of the battle group in Poland. It is composed of US as a framework nation, United Kingdom, and there are small contributions from Romania and Croatia as well. It was deployed to Orzysz, to northeastern Poland in 2017, and is composed of around 1,000 troops. So from its location, we can assume that its main task is to guard the so-called Suwałki Gap, so this passage between Poland and the Western Allies and the Baltic states. I agree with everything which was said before on the essence of the enhanced forward presence. So please let me just briefly mention the concept of liquid modernity developed by Polish philosopher Zygmunt Bauman. So basically, Bauman argued that we live in times of liquid modernity, marked by ambivalence, marked by insecurity, constant change, and temporality and fragility. So if we take this concept and apply it to security and defense and the northern flank, we would find out that actually battle groups and enhanced forward presence is something really stable and embedded on this European and transatlantic chessboard, given, just to mention, pandemic, tensions in transatlantic relations, Russia's and China's actions, disinformation, and cyber attacks. The constant changes of the rotations in EFP, the pre-planned deployments of troops, exercises, and excellent cooperation with host nations and between the battle groups themselves is something of note in these interesting times we live in. I see, coming back to Poland, I see the multiple roles of Poland in the whole concept. First, Poland is one of the host nations hosting EFP battle group. Second, Poland is also military hub for the broader US activity, US military activity on the entire eastern flank. And Poland is also force provider to the battle group in Latvia and to Romania. So there are some benefits, achievements of the battle group. Of course, it anchors US more strongly on the eastern flank. It facilitated cooperation with the Baltic states, enhanced readiness of Polish troops, local Polish troops. And last but not least, it accelerated the adaptation of Polish armed forces to the post-Crimea reality.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all panelists. It's really great to hear your individual perspectives on the host nations that you were studying and that you have obviously been studying for a number of years. And really would like now to maybe move into a question and answer where we get to do some comparative assessments or comparative thoughts between the experiences, perhaps different, perhaps the same, that the host nations have had in certain areas. So I'll sort of start off and frame that a little bit. In the paper, it was clear that, and even from the comments that all of you just made, that the host nations, each of them feel that the establishment of the EFP battle group within their country has actually been a very positive thing. And yet, interestingly, the structure of each of those EFP battle groups is quite different. While it's clear that there is a strong alliance strategic message that comes from having 23 of 30 NATO nations participating across the 4 EFPs, and that increases domestic confidence in the deterrent effect and the deterrence message that provides to Russia. There are, of course, operational challenges that come from multinational operations and tactical level integration, which is a key element of what the battle groups are looking to accomplish. So my question, having sort of set that framework, is, and perhaps Martin, I'll ask you to throw your perspective in first. Is there a right size and composition that all EFP battle groups should consider adopting? Or does it really need to be a customized solution that meets the needs and the characteristics of each of the host nations, both societal and geopolitical perspectives and circumstances? So over to you, Martin.
Thank you, General, for the question. I think it points out the compromise that was agreed on the political level in 2016, that it is important that as many allies as possible are involved in this effort, but on the other hand, that there has to be some kind of operational effect as well, because these battle groups will need to be ready to fight, so to say. There is a contradiction. I think that what has prevailed is the first aspect, that it is more important that nations are involved. I don't think that it's fair perhaps to draw any conclusions about the composition and the structure of all battle groups. They are different. I think that at least from an Estonian point of view, the Estonians have always been very happy with the solution that we have today in Estonia, having the United Kingdom as a framework nation and with France and Denmark as stable troop contributing nations. Thank you.
Thanks. Margarita, from a Lithuanian host nation perspective, do you have a similar view? You have certainly a few more contributing nations that work with the framework nation in Lithuania. Just turn that over for your thoughts. Perhaps it's the same. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. It's interesting to see that everyone's happy what one has. So we are very happy with our setup, and we are happy because we don't have too many countries. Because on one hand, it's easier in terms of operational activities, also in terms of procedures, but on the other hand, also in terms of political decisions, who will stay how long. So we know to whom to talk. So, but on one hand, this makes our life easier, but there are also advantages in terms of having very multinational battle group, and probably it's in terms of strategic messaging, etc., etc. So I think that, it's not the main issue, the size of the battle group and who is participating. But the point is you have to look at the battle group as one piece of the whole set. And this set, together with other battle groups and in general NATO defense, has to function very well. There should be interrelations. And that's very important, I think.
I would agree, and maybe I'll ask Tom's sort of as the study of another host nation that has had a lot of multinational approach for your perspective. Perhaps it's also quite similar to Margarita.
Yeah, well, if it's one thing that we can probably all agree upon is that the experience of the past 3 or 4 years has been quite positive. And in the case of Latvia, I personally, as a researcher, I had concerns and doubts about the possibility for, let's say, 10 or 11 nations to work together. But then at the level of military practitioners, they seem to be able to sort these things out. And in the end, the battle group works as well. Also, one small comment about the composition of the Latvian battle group. Obviously, Latvia is very happy with Canada as the framework nation. But then it is also quite important that as part of our battle group, we have countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Slovenia as well. And these are, these are sometimes considered to be Slavic countries. And it's important because a large part of Latvia's population are Russophones. And so they can see that this is not just some Western project, it's not just some Western presence in Latvia, but it's actually truly a multinational effort of which Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Poland, and other nations are also part of.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to a second question, if I can, and perhaps, Piotr, I'll have you sort of chime in on this question first. Host nations have had to make, in some cases, some significant infrastructure investments as a result of hosting the EFP battle groups within their nations. In your research and your colleagues' research, how did the nations represent this security investment in terms of the financial commitments that they made, and how is that investment seen by the population, by the government, in the context both of their individual national defense plans, but also their commitment to NATO?
Yes, thank you for this question. And infrastructure issues military infrastructure issues are really important for Poland, not only because of enhanced forward presence, but also because of the broader US military presence and allied military presence in Poland. So Poland is investing and will have to invest a lot in the development of military infrastructure as a hub for allied activity, and as this gateway to the Baltic states for allied reinforcements. And it is very important to remember that this infrastructure will be not only used by allied troops, but also it will be beneficial for Polish armed forces, and this is the way in which Poland looks at it.
Thanks. Tom's, from a Latvian perspective, is that sort of a similar view on the infrastructure investment?
Yeah, well, Latvia was underspending on its military until 2015, approximately. And a sizable part of our defense budget is devoted to provide host nation support. So, for instance, the Canadian troops until last year they lived in tents. All right. So we did have to invest into infrastructure to make sure that we can receive those troops properly. It might be regarded as an effort which saps away some of the funding which would be otherwise available to develop military capabilities, but it was also regarded as a necessity, because otherwise we simply wouldn't be able to provide sufficient host nation support.
Did any of the other panelists want to jump in on that question, or I'm certainly happy to move on to sort of another question? Oh, I see Martin's got his hand up. Go ahead, Martin.
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, in Estonia, the Estonian government was very quick in taking a deliberate decision to fund host nation support separately on top of the traditional defense budget, so to say. So in Estonia, we spend 2% of GDP on defense to meet our commitments to NATO and to do our other national defense development. And we also receive, or the Ministry of Defense receive, extra funding for host nation support, and that is then directed both towards the EFP but also to the enhanced Baltic air policing. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Thank you. It's again another a demonstration of commitment from the government. So maybe another question, panelists, that I'll put on the floor, and maybe Margarita, I'll ask you if you may want to weigh in on your answer first. The comparative size of the national armed forces of Poland and Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia are different, and their sizes and the composition of their hosted EFP battle groups also vary. Do you think that this has led in any way to differences in the way that host nations have seen or developed relationships with their battle groups, or is it not really been a factor across the board?
Probably it's been the fact, but there are also other issues which are very important. What is the chain of command in terms of, crisis, but also peace situation? How who is responsible for what, and how well the battle groups are integrated into the national units? These questions, I think, are very important, and not the size of, the host nation or the framework nation. Because what I'm trying to say, we are very lucky once again to have Germany, and despite that the size of our armed forces is very small, there is a very clear understanding and agreement what is integrated into what. Battle group is a part of our Iron Wolf brigade, And this creates very clear, chain of command and this cooperation and integration picture. Whereas in other countries, despite the size of the host nation or a contributing nation, these things are not probably so well coordinated. So I don't think that, the size is the most important issue. Anyways, as I said before, you have to see the whole picture, because if there is something happens, if there is a crisis, if there is a conflict, there should be links between all the units in all the countries. So one issue that could be an issue is the issue of infrastructure, which has already been mentioned. The smaller size of your armed forces, the smaller budget you have, the more you have to invest into infrastructure to host. And if you have additional exercises, for instance, like we had the US troops coming, there are limits of our infrastructure and we have to invest more. So this could be the challenge.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Panelists, this has been an interesting discussion and time is just flying by. So what I want to do is to have sort of one last sort of closing and forward-looking opportunity for you to provide some thoughts on sort of what is next. Can you just share a few thoughts, each of you? Maybe we can start with Martin on what could be, based upon your experience and your research, the next steps or the considerations as it pertains to the continuation or the evolution of the EFP battle group. Martin?
Thank you. I would first focus on some of the small fragments of the decisions made in 2016 that still need to be implemented. I think what has been discussed a number of years is to work more with the joint enablement of the battle groups, meaning that our support of the battle groups should be regularly exercised. Also, reinforcement of the battle groups should be exercised regularly. Today, we see that in terms of large-scale reinforcement exercises, there is only a very small number of nations that actually do that on a regular basis, and that's an important element of the EFP. Last but not least, integrating the battle groups into the alliance's overall planning, contingency planning, that's an important step to make. So more is to be done, but within the decisions that already were made in 2016. Thank you.
Thanks. Piotr, why don't you give us your thoughts on your closing thoughts and thoughts about sort of the future of the EFP battle group concept?
Yes, thank you. And adding to what Martin just said on reinforcements and exercises, I think that it is important to regularly test the whole command structure, something which was discussed in our volume. And we have at the moment 2 division level NATO headquarters in the region. So it's a great task to keep both fully manned and capable. And I saw that we received a question on hybrid threats and disinformation campaigns. So in the future, I think it will be more and more important to take care of strategic communication. Everyone is an actor in this game. So we saw many attempts to undermine confidence in EFP, fake news on NATO soldiers spreading COVID, on doing damage to the society. So this is for sure an important dimension.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Margarita, your thoughts?
Thank you. Adding to what has already been said, I want to once again bring in this political issue, saying very clearly for how long we have enhanced forward presence, this political commitment. Now we are living in the world with so many challenges that we would not be distracted to respond to other challenges, and this region would not suffer from that. Moreover, because the contributions to AFP comes from very different countries and from a number of countries. So are we on the same line for how long we have EFP? So that's, I think, is very important issue.
Thank you. And then certainly, last but not least, Tom's your thought on the way forward.
Yeah, two things. With regard to the battle groups, the question really is, do we improve the battle groups, or do we improve everything that is around the battle groups and that is meant to support them? And I think this latter element is more important than the first element, because there are certainly some ways in which you can improve the battle groups, but then, you know, the whole framework is probably more important. And the second point is, well, we can look forward to, let's say, take the next steps. But I think it's important to keep in mind that lots of bad things and missteps that we expected originally, they didn't happen. So I think it's important to move forward, but it's also important not to fall back, because I think our battle groups have been spared of negative publicity, and let's keep it that way.
Always a good thought. You know, we want to sort of keep that the positive contribution that makes going forward. So I appreciate that thought for sure. This has been an absolutely fascinating sort of set of conversations around the host nation perspective of the EFP battle groups. And I'd really like to thank the panelists, Tom Rostoks, Martin Hurt, Margarita Seselgyte, and Piotr, my goodness, I always butcher my name. My apologies, my dear friend, Piotr Szymanski from Poland, for really taking part and interacting with each other and highlighting the value of the work that you've done in contributing to this particular volume. So again, thank you very much for being here. Happy Independence Day again, Martin. And thank you for your contribution to the research book. So, so next we will move on to the second panel that I had talked about at our introduction, which is the panel that reflects on the experiences that were captured of the framework nations who were putting in place the battle groups. And so we have three folks with us today to talk about that. Colonel Nikolaus Carstens, who is the head of strategic planning and communications branch in the German Army Command, Robert Clark, who is a defense researcher at King's College in London, in England, and Alexander Lanoszka from the University of Waterloo in Canada. So I'm going to welcome all of you to the panel, and we'll do a more in-depth introduction of each of you. We'll follow the same sort of structure that we did with the first panel, which is get your thoughts and opening comments on the chapters that you wrote in the research paper on your observations and of the framework nations view of the EFP battle groups. Then we'll move into a collaborative Q&A session going forward from there. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, good. So first, let me more fully introduce Colonel Nikolaus Carstens, who, as I said, is from German Army Command. He has been Chief of Plans in the Operations Department in the Army Command. He was actually the officer who was responsible for the setting up of the German Enhanced Forward Presence battle group in Lithuania. And in his following assignments as the German military representative at NATO headquarters in Brussels, he has been very closely following the EFP issues at the strategic level moving forward. So welcome, Nikolaus, to the discussion in the webinar today, and would look forward to hearing your perspective on the German experience as a framework nation.
Yeah, thank you, General Allen, for your kind words, and a warm welcome from Strausberg to this web seminar. Let me first express my congratulations to the initiators of this research paper. who, in my point of view, created an excellent paper which puts together a lot of valuable experience and knowledge in a very concise and convincing way. I think this paper is an important contribution to highlight a real success story of NATO, namely its ability to react quickly and determined to emerging threats. I was very pleased to be part of the project, because also we should be proud what has been achieved in the last 4 years in EFP. We are all aware that there are still a lot of lessons identified which have to be turned into real lessons learned in order to improve and make real progress in our collective deterrence and defense capability and the ability to warfight. I think putting the experience together in such a paper helps on the path on this way. For General Browse, who took me on board in this project, and me, it was extremely enriching work to work and put together the German perspective on EFP, as he was the witness on the strategic level in NATO during the initial phase of EFP, where I was more at the tactical level, in the weeds, so to speak. We had to had to put together the task force in practical terms. Our article reflects these two perspectives and experiences. There are a lot of findings out there, but let me emphasize two which I think are crucial and which have also already been addressed in the first panel. The first thing is there's a fine line to balance between multinationality and operational effectiveness. So the two questions which are out there, how many nations are too much and how many nations is enough? Because for deterrence effects, you need the flags on the ground, but for your ability for warfighting, you must limit the number of nations involved. I think from the German perspective, we found this balance in the way we set up the EFP battle group. And in doing so, and finding this balance, we saw in the last 4 years that this multinationality and AFP can work as a catalyst to improve our interoperability. And we have made a lot of steps on this way. The second point I want to emphasize is that it is important to see the role of EFP as an important building block for deterrence and defense, but we have to see it in a wider framework. And a sound reinforcement concept and a robust command and control capacity that is trained through all levels of command, namely the EFP battle group, the brigade level, the division, and the corps level, is something which is important and which has obviously to be addressed even more. And the last point I would like to make, and my Lithuanian colleague already said that before, it was very good for us to have this experience in working together with the host nation. It started with EFP, but we now expanded a lot of fields where cooperation takes place in training, and that was an excellent experience, and shows that we really moved forward in the last 4 years. That are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. That's fantastic. The next panelist that I'll introduce is Robert Clark. As I had mentioned, he's a defense researcher at King's College in London, England. He's a British military veteran, and he holds a postgraduate degrees in defense studies and in Arabic. Robert's main research includes emerging technologies with the defense, alliance building, and transatlantic partnerships, authoritarian threats to global order. His most recent publications include those for the NATO Defense College and Civitas. In addition, Robert also served for 9 years in the British Army, deploying to both Iraq and Afghanistan. So please welcome Robert, and please share with us your perspectives as you considered the experience of EFP from a framework nation perspective.
Well, thank you very much, General Allen, for the introduction, and thank you for the hosts of this session today. This builds on the research that myself and my co-authors James Rogers and Andrew Vauxhall did last year with the British Army, and I'll just go through some of the stages of this and the key findings really. So naturally, the Baltic region has long been important to the United Kingdom. This serves as the UK's primary gateway to Northern Europe, in addition to its proximity and subsequent vulnerability to Russia. This historical interest in the Baltics can be readily demonstrated by Britain opening up a second flank in the region during the Crimean War, in addition to significantly aiding the Estonian War of Independence against the Soviet Union in the aftermath of the First World War. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent annexation of Crimea in 2014, the UK was a natural fit as a framework nation deploying alongside Estonian allies. Now, despite the impact which the ongoing global pandemic has had on the UK's global commitments and deployments, Britain remains as resolute as ever supporting the NATO alliance and the Baltic region in particular. As then Defence Secretary Michael Fallon remarked at the onset of the UK's deployment, although we are leaving the European Union, we remain absolutely committed to European security. Now, the United Kingdom has of course left the European Union, but the commitment to ensuring European security actually lies at the very heart of the government's Global Britain foreign policy agenda. To put simply, the British objective, which is deterring Russian aggression on NATO's eastern flank, is being achieved. This is being achieved at the strategic level by the forward deployment of British troops to both Estonia and Poland, operating with partners and allies. Now, this significantly changes the risk calculus for any adversary, and according to the Estonian Defence Minister, it takes the military option off the table for Russia. At the tactical level, having a highly capable all-arms battle group integrated with Estonian plans provides a very credible role in the Estonian defence plan more broadly. Therefore, through this deployment, deterrence by denial prevents the so-called tripwire effect from being used at all. If I just cover two brief points we found in the research, the first is a development point. So regarding the pre-deployment for the nature of the threat itself. Now, whilst the pre-deployment training places an emphasis on integrating armour with dismounted infantry, the threat from the so-called Russian hybrid space is something which can be addressed in more detail in the pre-deployment space for the battle groups going forwards. This is particularly evident when the battle groups have been deployed to the large training areas in Canada for the training, where there's no emphasis placed on the civilian population, or CivPop, which can integrate with the battle group in a way that would actually accurately relate to how the Russian influence and control of the local population may occur in Estonia. And then a sustainment point for the battle group. It's actually exceeded expectations by influencing and supporting the Russian-speaking Estonian community. This has been achieved by various innovative and engaging events and subtle influence operations conducted by the successful battle groups. This has resulted in a 10% positive change in the attitudes of the Russian community towards NATO. There's also a key driver of change within the British deployment, and that's regarding the perspective and the ability to implement lessons learned from the rotating battle groups from both framework and host nations. There was a symposium hosted by the UK in 2019, bringing together shared collective experiences at the tactical level, highlighting the requirement to develop further specific capabilities, including fighting in woods and forests for UAF, joint fires, employing engineer assets for both blocking and delaying operations, and also strategic communications at the operational level. And with that, I'll hand back over to General Allen. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Finally, I'll ask our third panelist to come in and share his perspectives, and that's Alexander Lanoszka, who wrote about Canada as a framework nation. Alexander's an assistant professor of international relations in the Department of Political Science and at the Basile School of International Affairs at the University of Waterloo in Ontario in Canada. His research encompasses international security, alliance politics, theories of war, with a special focus on Central and Northeastern Europe. He sits on the editorial board of the Journal of Contemporary Security Policy and is an honorary fellow at City University of London, where he has also previously taught. He's had fellowships at at MIT and at Dartmouth College upon finishing his PhD at Princeton. So welcome, Alexander, and please provide us some insights into your perspectives of Canada's experience as a framework nation.
Thank you, General Allen, and thank you to MLI for hosting this event. I would be remiss if I did not mention the MINDS program at the Canadian Department of National Defence for its sponsorship of this event. In fact, this very project was made possible thanks to a targeted engagement grant that we received back in 2019. Now, much can be said about Canada's participation in the enhanced forward presence as the framework nation in Latvia. But there are three things I would like to highlight in the chapter that I co-wrote with Christian Leuprecht and Alexander Mons, the other two co-editors. The first point is about multinationality. The battle group is indeed the most diverse of all four, considering that 9 countries contribute to it alongside Canada, in effect, a third of the alliance. On the one hand, this may create problems of interoperability that in turn can undermine military or operational effectiveness. That being said, of course, the certification process that the battle group in Latvia undertakes is arguably the most rigorous of the four. On the other hand, this diversity does allow for risk to be spread further and across the alliance, as any major assault, however unlikely it may be, would implicate more NATO countries. Diversity may have certain downsides, but it certainly has its virtues as well. The second point relates to Task Force Latvia, which I think is underappreciated both in alliance circles as well as in Canadian defense conversations. The TFL is a neat institutional innovation that Canada has put in Latvia with continuous officers and staff to assure continuity of communications and progress across battle group rotations. At least as of 2020, its headquarters has been housed in the Latvian Brigade's own headquarters. This presence creates a permanent liaison, thereby ensuring institutional memory while offsetting the disruptions that can so often arise when different units rotate through the country. Again, at least as of last year, to the best of my knowledge, the TFL is unique among the framework nations, and I'm not entirely sure why it has not been replicated elsewhere in the region. The third and final point is that the Canadian Embassy in Riga, the TFL that I just mentioned, and the battle group itself have undertaken a coordinated whole of government approach. This has been especially important in addressing the challenge posed by disinformation campaigns directed against NATO and its presence in Latvia. After all, the conventional wisdom has been that Latvia represents the hardest country to defend, in part because of perceptions about its ethnic politics, as well as how public opinion has been much less supportive of strong NATO deterrence and defense measures against Russia than elsewhere in the region. Yet, thanks in part to Canada's coordinated efforts, disinformation has become a manageable, if irritating problem, as the Canadians prioritize engaging with locals so that Latvians can understand the NATO presence and how Canadian military personnel measure up against the negative narratives disseminated by Russia. So in sum, I think we can rightly assess that the work done so far on the part of Canada and the battle group is a success, certainly when we measure it against the expected difficulties that such a broad coalition would encounter in Latvia. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexander. And maybe panelists, as we move into the set of questions, I'll tease out something that was sort of a part of what Alexander's talked about in his opening remarks, and that has to do with sort of a whole of government approach. NATO is a political military organization, and the EFP battle groups are manned and populated by NATO countries. I guess I would ask, maybe other than Alexander, what is the nature or the integrated nature of both the foreign affairs or a whole of government approach that takes place in country, in the host country, as it pertains to the EFP engagement itself? Does it exist for the UK and for Germany, or is it truly much more focused on being a defense, military security sort of alliance? Maybe Robert, I'll throw it over to you first.
Sure, thank you for the question. The whole of government approach really can be evidenced quite broadly. So with the FCDO, there's a presence within Estonia and partly in Poland with the battle group supporting the Americans. And one of the big things they're trying to achieve there is mitigating against the information space, which Russia seek to dominate, particularly amongst the Russian-speaking community. This is particularly pertinent in Estonia, particularly on the border region, as you can imagine. Obviously, here in the UK, we're waiting out for the integrated review in defence and security and foreign policy, which is due in the coming weeks. Naturally, we'll see a lot more how the UK government intends to flesh this out going forwards with the enhanced forward presence. So we're all quite interested to see that. But yes, the whole of government approach is certainly witnessed in Estonia in particular.
Thanks, Robert. Nicholas, from the German perspective, how is it approached in the engagement with the country, the host nation?
I mean, when it comes to the EFP battle group itself, they are quite focused on the daily work, on the training, and so. There, the whole of government approach is not integral part of the EFP concept, and I think that's the right way, because you should not overtax the involved battalion commander. Who, if you have commanded an infantry unit at that size, you know that you have a lot to do in order to do so. That has to happen on other levels, and where we see that this really matured, I can say, is in these hybrid events we had when things happened in Lithuania, where quick reaction of Russian activities was taking place, and that was very good coordinated between Lithuania and Germany, and obviously the embassy involved in there as well. So that is our view on it.
Thanks, Nicholas. I'll move on to another question for you to consider, and Alexander, perhaps I'll get you to sort of answer first. The conclusions of the research paper highlighted that while the EFP battle groups have a fairly high domestic visibility inside the host nations, that's not necessarily the case for the visibility of the battle group within framework nations. Across the board, including, I think, for the United States, who are not part of the panel here today. Do you think that, I think, you know, in your papers, you commented that sometimes this can be seen as a risk, other times it's an advantage. I just thought maybe I could ask you to tease out what the nature of that lack of visibility, or not as visible potentially as other military engagement is to the framework nation. So Alexander, I'll start with you.
Sure, and to be sure, this is an issue where I do go back and forth. I've written in the pages of International Journal that this is a problem, so I certainly have mixed feelings in this regard. On the one hand, a deterrent is strongest if it is backed up with a very clearly communicated intent to follow through on a particular action, no matter the cost, and that intent is communicated forcefully by political leaders. This lack of visibility suggests that leaders can just as well wash their hands of it if things do get indeed difficult. On the other hand, this lack of visibility can provide cover with respect to potential political politicization, such that this does not become a partisan plaything at home. And certainly with debates in the United States having taken a very partisan hue as to the military deployment that the United States certainly has at this point, in the last 4 years, we can see potential dangers in this regard. Still, I think in the Canadian context, there is this troubling disregard of defense issues more broadly, and that this can indeed hamper the acquisition of much needed capabilities, especially if the electoral costs for neglecting the military slight. So it's not just the low visibility of the battle group itself in Canada that may be a problem, but I think it's just the low visibility that defense issues just generally have in Canada that may be a bigger issue too.
Thanks. Robert, from your perspective? You're muted still, Robert.
Apologies. I was starting to say the visibility in the United Kingdom is still relatively low, which is surprising more than anything, considering this is actually the UK's second highest deployment in terms of personnel commitment after our contribution to Afghanistan. So that's surprising more than anything. Now I see this as a disadvantage, and that's for two specific reasons. The first is really the ability to inform the UK general population, civil society, and the media in general regarding not only the deployment, but therefore the nature of the Russian threat and how the deployment tries to mitigate it. It's not just about integrating armor and infantry, dismounted infantry, but also within the disinformation and cyberspace. Now, this is a domain that Russia have exploited quite successfully in the Baltics for the last 5 to 10 years, and it's only really been in the last few years that's become a problem in the UK here as well. This is evidenced both by the most recent UK general election and also Russian spreading disinformation regarding COVID vaccinations from last year. So if there was more of a higher visibility of the role the UK is doing within the UK, it would certainly help to sort of combat the notion of the Russian threat more accurately as well, not just in the Baltics, but here in the UK as well. The second reason I'd say this is a disadvantage for the UK regarding the low visibility of the deployment is the nature of the campaign itself, the assets. So regarding the use of heavy armor and dismounted infantry, this is quite a intense debate here in the UK at the moment. Like I say, running into the integrated review regarding the centrality that's still seen in a lot of military circles of heavy armor and the potential that this may be reduced in scope somewhat. This isn't just a domestic issue that the UK is facing. This is a much more broader NATO question on capability going forwards. Obviously the trade-off being things like cyber space and the like of that. So I think this is a very interesting debate and one that is actually quite fundamental to the UK more broadly at the moment. But certainly the visibility, the surprising low visibility, I would say is a marked disadvantage for the UK.
Thanks. What about from a German perspective, Nicholas?
See at the moment a real disadvantage. When we started the EFP, we had quite high visibility in Germany regarding this new mission, and that was also throughout the people in the country due to the fact that there was the feeling that after having felt the support of allies in the Cold War, it was now on us to show the support to the allies in the East. And so the media coverage was quite high. This now is reduced to a normal level. But even though there is not this coverage which we probably would like to see, nobody really questions the role we play as a framework nation. It is broadly accepted, and from the military side, we are very determined to and very glad to have this mission because it helps us throughout the army to re-establish the mindset of readiness. Because deploying the forces in the rotational mode brings nearly every unit in the army in a situation where they make this experience. And the training environment in Lithuania is perfect to come back to refocus on collective defense. After a long time, we focused on international crisis management, which asked different skills from you.
Thanks, Nicholas. And I think I'm going to come back to you as the first answer to the next question, because it builds a little bit upon what you had previously spoken about, and it has to do with the rotational nature of the troops as a result of the 1997 NATO Russian Founding Act and the way in which the troops rotate through. You had identified that from a German perspective, a lot of the German troops, because they're rotating through, are getting this experience, but the actual the gelling and the integration that needs to happen within the EFP when there is such a significant turnaround in rotation time frame can potentially become a deterrent in the EFP battle group capability piece. So if you could, Nicholas, maybe contrast the difference between perhaps the value from a German military perspective of having that EFP experience versus the challenges that arise to a battle group commander who's continuously working with new forces, and the integration of that battle group, which always has new capabilities into it, with the actual host nation military and military operations. So back to you if I can, Nicholas.
There is two sides of a coin, as always in these topics. But as I said before, for us it was very important to, and we didn't have that in the crisis management missions in the past. There we had the material, the equipment on place, and only the personnel was rotating. In the EFP, we have the original unit, the original battalion that takes its own equipment and rotates and exercises the whole process. You know, how to get ready, to get to deploy, and then to get ready in Lithuania and integrate. And if you do that throughout the army, you have a widespread experience of these important things, especially when you see that we shouldn't, and I said that before, only focus on the EFP group, but we have to think about how do reinforcements look like, and they will have to exercise the same task when doing so. So that was very important for us in having EFP to have this experience throughout the army, not only in one particular unit. The downside is obviously that you have a lot of effort to undertake to integrate. But as I said before, if you find the right balance of multinationality and you have the same nations being part of the battle group, as we have established in the German battle group at the moment, you can begin to address some of the interoperability issues, and that makes integration much easier and faster to happen. So in the end, I think it is never a perfect solution, but I think it's the way we approach it is good and brings a lot of positive results.
Great, thanks. How about from your perspective, Robert?
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, I think the rotational nature of the battle groups works very well and complements both the mission and working with the Estonians and the ability to fit seamlessly now into their defence plan. It's a heavy armour squadron and a armoured infantry battle group at its core. Now within the UK, the British Army, these are rotated through every few years. So most of the units now who have gone through on this rotational basis are now on like their third rotation, their deployment. And crucially, whilst the battle group commanders may change, the company commanders, the platoon commanders at the tactical level, they will have been there several times now. So that really does help with the forging those sort of key those key leadership engagements and those key relationships regarding the Estonians and the British, and that has a massively advantageous effect.
Thanks. And Alexander, your thoughts from the Canadian perspective?
Well, I'm not sure if this is the Canadian perspective, but to go back to the wording of your question, the reason why, in part, these deployments are rotational to begin with is because of the constraints posed by the NATO-Russia Founding Act. Now, this is an artificial constraint on the deployment model. Certainly, it expressly forbids the permanent stationing of substantial combat forces east of Germany on the territory of states that have joined NATO since 1999. Now, this constraint is all the more artificial because one would think that the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass have fundamentally altered the security environment, thereby allowing for the Founding Act to be mute as a result of rebus sic stantibus. But the alliance has made this political decision to abide by the Founding Act all the same, and so we have these rotational deployments. I think there are two issues, though, that come with these sorts of deployments as opposed to a permanent stationing. One is that rotational forces generally just have less reassurance value since they are just easier to withdraw relative to, of course, permanent forces. And the other problem too, and Canada's not so much in a position to really address this issue because it's one that most effectively impacts the host nations, is that because Canadian forces or other framework nations forces are being rotated through, they're exercising at a fairly high tempo with local forces who are always there. And so they're constantly having to exercise, and that could add to their wear and tear. Even as early as 2017, when my co-author, Michael Hunziker, who was in fact tasked with the American chapter, just couldn't make it today, and I discovered that in interviews, there was already the sense that these rotational deployments can induce a little too much exhaustion on the part of local forces who are constantly having to exercise and endure very difficult certification regimes, which again benefits the alliance from a military perspective, but could still have these negative effects all the same.
Great, thank you for that. And just like at the first panel, time is gone faster than I would like it to. So what I want to do again is sort of offer you each an opportunity for some closing remarks, and if you can, to sort of focus them on sort of that next step, the future of EFP Battle Group, either in the context of the battle group itself or the broader defense and security environment that NATO and both NATO nations and others find themselves in. So maybe Nicholas, I'll go to you first.
I think in the last 4 years, we have very much focused on optimizing and making the EFP Battle Group better. But I think we are now at a stage where, although there are minor things which can be adjusted, we are fine. But as already stated in my initial remarks, I think we now have to concentrate on the levels above to see that the EFP battle groups within the host nation brigades are combined with a reinforcement concept and a command and control arrangement that is not only in place on paper, but that is also trained in order to make it happen, to make it work when needed. capabilities. So I think that is something we should really concentrate in the next steps at.
Great, thanks. Alexander, from your perspective.
I mean, once again, much more could be said than in the time I have allotted. But again, to repeat what I just said, the problem I think is that these deployments are impermanent. You know, they are rotational, and so by their nature, they can be waited out and does have much more limited reassurance of value than what we might get with permanent forces. Of course, Canada is committed to the enhanced forward presence until 2023, when its mandate finally expires. But there obviously raises the question, what happens thereafter? And certainly, I don't see any short-term effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the deployment, not between now and 2023. And indeed, the mission has endured beyond, or despite the pandemic rather. But I do worry that a political decision may be made to simply run down the clock and to withdraw from the region, especially because in Canada, we are going to have to face a fairly significant fiscal crunch as a result of the debt accrued to mitigate the pandemic's economic effects. Russia knows this. It can similarly be biding its time before deciding to ratchet up hostilities, if of course it determines that doing so would suit its interests, and there are reasonable debates to be had on that effect. But still, this could be an issue moving forward at the highest political levels.
Thank you. And Robert.
Thank you. Yes, I think the first 2 or 3 years really of the British battle group's priority, if you like, was the actual integration and the operating with the Estonian, Polish, and American allies. I think going forwards, there's going to be an incredible emphasis on the sustainment side. Even though just acknowledging Alexander's recent remark about how the lack of longevity and the non-permanence nature of the deployment, there needs to be that sustainment consideration. In particular, if we look at last year's Defender Europe exercise that was unfortunately cancelled due to the pandemic, this was going to test the reinforcements from Western Europe into what's his Suwalki Gap and into the Baltics. This will need consideration going forwards when it's able to do so, and also just finally the further integration of both the maritime and the air campaigns to better align with the enhanced forward presence. So both the NATO air policing mission, which is based out of Lithuania, and also the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force, which operates in the Baltic Sea. Now, at present, the battle groups train, integrate, and operate primarily between the individual host and framework nations. The scope of this really should be broadened to include both the maritime and the air domains much more broadly in general. Thank you.
Thanks very much to all three panelists. I think having this debate and dialogue is actually quite important. And I want to thank you for having written the chapters that you wrote and provided the perspectives that you did, both within the research paper itself, but also today at the webinar that we're having today. So again, thank you very much. It was great to chat with all of you, and I hope we do so again soon. We're now going to move on to some sort of concluding remarks from Alexander Moens, who is going to who has really been supportive of this research project and this supporting webinar. Alexander, as I mentioned previously, is a professor at Simon Fraser University and is the director of the NATO Field School and the Simulation Program, and has researched and written about NATO and international security for 3 decades. There's a strong connection. The strong connection that he has with NATO was further evidenced when he became the Eisenhower Fellow at the NATO Defense College in Rome in 2015. So Alexander, I know you've been listening to our panelists as they have been providing their thoughts and perspectives. So what is your takeaway from what you have heard discussed here today?
Well, thank you very much, General Allen, and for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I think this has been very successful because what we heard this morning has really been the spirit of the whole project, and reflects the seminar workshop we did in Latvia. You know, this is a happy and an important story, these 4 enhanced forward presence battle groups. What does it all mean, though? I just want to back up a little bit and see if I can put it into a perspective for our Canadian audience and international audience. What we have here in these 4 battle groups, in these 4 NATO missions, is solidarity and credibility. There's a small EU and NATO member states in the Baltics and the bigger one, Poland. These are democratic states with a rather unfriendly great power next door. And what we do in NATO, and what is so important to Canadians to understand, and people all throughout the NATO alliance, is that NATO has a charter. It's found in its preamble, and it emphasizes that its entire mission is about upholding principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law through the means of security and defense. So what we have seen in these 4 battle groups, and what we need in the future, is a kind of an emphasis, as Alexander Lanoszka also said, at home in the NATO members, especially the framework nations at home, that this is in fact multilateralism in action. This is putting your resources where your values are. This is important. And it has been quite successful. That's a happy side of the story. But Russia remains, of course, a very unpredictable great power. And the 4 battle groups have significant challenges, reinforcement. How credible is the deterrence of a non-nuclear framework nation like Canada doing an battle group with 9 other countries? This is for all very important to continue. There is no way, I think, that we should let it all run out by the clock. Not until there is significant change in Russia and in Russia's foreign policy. And I think it's a reminder to Canadians that defense investment is real and helps people. It helps people, as Ambassador Rex, our ambassador in Latvia, always emphasizes, in that we take a whole of government approach. We try to be useful and constructive in all of Latvia's societal aspects. I also want to conclude my little conclusion by thanking some of the key centers and institutes that have made this possible. Beside the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the research division at the NATO Defense College, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in especially the office in Riga, the Center for Eastern Studies in Warsaw, Poland, Center for Security and Strategic Research at the National Defense Academy of Latvia, the International Center for Defense and Security in Estonia, and the German Institute for Defense and Security Studies. And on behalf of all of us, I want to say a special thank you to Lieutenant General Allen for her very clear, precise, thorough, and personable moderation of this debate. And we look forward to having many more such opportunities by means of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I appreciate that. And I have to tell you, for me, it is a privilege to be sitting with my NATO colleagues at the military committee table and talking about the things that really matter to us as nations. And so having public discourse like this, having research done into these types of issues, I think is just incredibly important to, as I said, maintain that public discourse and that engagement on what are some very, very important topics. So again, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for being part of both the research project as well as being here today. To Christian Leuprecht for his setting up an opening remarks on this, all of the panelists, and Alexander. I do want to thank the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, but perhaps even more importantly, the key people behind the scenes who have made this actually work today, which is Alison Kerrigan and Brett Briers, for everything that they've done behind the scenes to let us have this webinar today. Thank you to all of you for being here. Good night, and we'll see you next time.